A very good afternoon to you and welcome to the first webinar of our series about mobility and concepts for high quality cities with alternative mobility solutions for the residents. We are more than happy to have such a large audience today and we will give you a comprehensive insight on how we see the mobility of the future. The topic of today's webinar is mobility, certainly a broad topic, and we will give you an overview about current thinking in this area and why this topic is of such importance, especially in the context of sustainable development. That's my colleague, Mark, and myself. Mark is an urban planner with a background in transport planning. He worked as a transport consultant and contributed with his work to planning frameworks, master plans, and worked on urban designs for new developments, always with the focus on integrated transport solutions.
This is also Reinhard, my colleague. He's a very experienced specialist for cable cars. His works includes the construction, technology development, and project management for large-scale cable car projects. His interests and competences are also the development of sustainable urban mobility solutions, and together we develop urban mobility concepts with cable cars.
Thank you very much. So let's share the screen for our audience. It looks good. So let's start with what's on with mobility and where are we coming from? Urbanization is the process of urban growth. Urban growth describes mostly the growth of cities where an increasing proportion of the world's population lives. This process leads to an increasing importance of mobility for us. A larger urban population needs transport to reach places of work, education, healthcare, and of course, for leisure activities. At the same time, traffic shouldn't compromise the quality of life in cities. It is well known that the majority of the world's population already lives in cities. It is currently 50%, and it is assumed that this number will rise to 70% by 2050. And the urbanization process continues at the same rate. For a start, we would like to know what your mobility looks like and which mode of transport you used. We would like to start with a little survey and kindly ask you to answer the following questions to get robust results. We will analyze and let you know the results towards the end of this webinar. Our first question is, how did you get to work today? The option 1 is non-motorized transport, B, car or by bike, and C, you arrived with the public transport. The next question, we want to know, how far do you live from work? Is the distance up to 5 kilometers, or B, up to 10 kilometers, or even more than 10 kilometers?
So our last question is, we would like to know, where do you live? Do you live in an urban or rural environment? So this will give you an idea what services are available to you. So please click on urban or rural. And as we said, we will analyze these results at the end of this webinar. And now we would like to go on with our topic.
Mobility is an important factor for economic, social, and ecological development. The more mobile we are, the easier it is to reach work, school, university, or places of healthcare. Without people's mobility, economic activities are difficult. The exchange of goods becomes difficult. The higher the income, the better our ability to move around. That is because a higher income allows for a wider choice of modes of transport. We can choose the mode of transport that is most suitable for our activities. The car is used for longer distances or the weekly grocery shopping. And I use public transport to get to work or to school. To move within my neighborhood, I can choose to use my bicycle or go by feet. And maybe there is a motorbike only used for leisure trips. And there is an ecological dimension. Our choice of mode of transport has an ecological footprint. The use of certain modes of transport will create fumes and noise. The private vehicle, our car, certainly allows for a high degree of flexibility in our mobility, but has, compared to other modes of transport, a bigger ecological footprint. While working an efficient transport will take into consideration ecological aspects, will also create a wider economic impact through higher productivity and a higher quality of life without a negative impact on public health from transport. Let's have a look how urban mobility and traffic have developed until they reach the current status we know.
So let's have a look at why urban mobility is of such importance and how transport influenced urban development. The industrialization of the 20th century initiated the growth of emerging industrial cities. People moved into the cities in search of work, and cities quickly expanded and crossed the historic city boundaries. We have to imagine that before that, cities were really walled cities. We know them, big city wall around them. And once they grew larger, the distance between homes and workplaces grew. And this is why it became necessary to introduce mobility solutions that could handle the daily commuter flows. Daily commuter flows because there were factories where people worked, where they had to get to in the morning. So the introduction of new modes of transport had an impact on the expansion of the urban area. So trains would allow for larger distances between residential areas and workplaces. And also they created quick links between those areas, which again supported the spatial growth of cities. So growing distances could be overcome easily. And this again paved the way for urban expansion. Let's have a look at this satellite image of Moscow. The influence of transport corridors on urban form can be well illustrated on this photo. So we can see in the center, you can see the center of Moscow, clearly recognizable as an illuminated bright spot in the center. And from that, roads radiated into the suburbs. Where these roads meet the ring road, we have another intensified development. So these spots can also be seen on the photo. We have this slightly illustrated here. So you see, this is how the transport corridors influence the urban form. So urban development and the mobility of city dwellers are closely and mutually related. When cities grow, the population will need modes of transport to overcome growing distances within the urban area. At the same time, availability of new efficient modes of transport allowed for larger distances between residential areas and places of work, and development could take place further away from the centers of business and manufacturing. So have a look at the example of Berlin, which gives a good idea of the extent of urban growth. Top right is the map of Berlin in 1800. The width from east, or the distance from east to west, is only 3.5 kilometers. This is certainly a walkable distance. And for comparison, below you see the area of the former airport Tempelhof, and the distance from the west to the east is 2.2 kilometers. And this is just for transport infrastructure. It quickly became clear that some kind of transport was needed to overcome growing distances and to move the growing urban population. It was not only that the cities expanded, it was also that there was a higher density of cities, which meant that there was even more people in need of transport. Initially, suburban train lines formed transport corridors, and they were later succeeded by urban motorways. So the car became a very important factor for mobility. And let's have a look how the car created new urban topologies. Among them were the large shopping malls, which were only best, or if not only, accessible by car. They are set back from the streets and surrounded by car parks on all sides. Let's have a look at the area highlighted on this photo. The area's dimensions are 1.7 kilometers and a depth of 500 meters. The buildings we see on this aerial photograph are one large shopping mall and various big box stores, large buildings with a large retailer in each of them. We can also see how much parking dominates this area. I'll show you. So you can see the car, this is all car parking spaces. So you see this area is dominated by car parking. And this means the car parking spaces are only used during opening hours of the shops. And walking wasn't even considered as an option when this urban design was planned, and is not encouraged. There are no pedestrian links between the various shops, and even the short distance between two shops requires a car. This will also result in a longer driving distance than a walking distance, because as a pedestrian, I would just walk in a straight line from door to door. Meanwhile, with a car, I have to leave the car park, go to the public road, and enter the car park again. So this area was clearly designed to be used by the car. Another problem is that the surrounding residential areas are only accessible at one point, and these entrance points are not always aligned to the entrances to the car parks. So as a car driver, I might just take this little detour to get to this shopping area. Meanwhile, as a pedestrian, it means a large detour for me, because this is not the most direct route. As a car driver, this is less exhausting, but if I have to carry a heavy bag, it rains or the sun shines, it will become very, very exhausting. So we have a look at another area here, and this is the same dimensions that they are highlighted, and it's a small town of Celebration in Florida. It's a planned community, and it has a population of 7,500. The main difference of the two areas, as I said, it's the same dimension, is that the urban design was aimed to create an environment where people could walk to reach their destination. The road network is permeable for pedestrians and cyclists. It is possible to reach each place I want to go to directly. Traditional enclosed streetscapes flanked by houses on both sides were created. The building's main facades are face the street. This supports informal social control. The town center in the lower to the south of this area contains a mix of uses where offices, shops, and residential units can be found. This is an expressive example how a less car-focused design approach can create a totally different environment. It allows residents for a wider choice of mobility options without compromising on accessibility. And let's see how traffic dominates cities. The aerial photograph we see here is of the city of
Ludwigshafen.
Ludwigshafen in Germany, and not considered when planning cities for the car. The massive impact on the urban fabric, including the demolition of houses and established residential neighborhoods. It also had an effect on the social structures and compromised the attractiveness of neighborhoods as a place to live. Elevated highways were built that cut through historic quarters, which required the demolition of whole street blocks. The residents who would remain in what was left of the neighborhood lived close to a main traffic corridor. While this might have been perceived as an asset, it quickly became a nuisance as traffic volumes grew. This image gives a good impression on how transport infrastructure can shape a city, and in this case, cut through it. To give an impression of how much space is used for transport infrastructure, we had a look at how many times one of the existing building blocks would fit onto the space used for the elevated highway and its ramps. So this is 3 times one of the building blocks, and this happened without any adaptations to adapt to the surroundings and the topography. So we assume that around 750 people live in this block. This means that at least an additional 2,250 people could find a home here.
High quality home, because near the water side?
Yes, and centrally located and in walkable distance to the city center. So people won't need any motorized transport if they live there, and this would be a potential for a further reduction of motorized traffic.
The car is one of the new chapters of mobility that started in the late 1915s, when the private automobile became affordable and larger proportions of a society could purchase one. The emerging middle class in many societies also supported the rise in car ownership. It has a visible and significant impact on how cities developed. The private vehicle was more than just a mode of transport that allowed for a new dimension of individual mobility. It became a status symbol, and a symbol for personal wealth. We still look at the car as a status symbol, and nowadays economic growth in emerging countries leads to increased car ownership. For example, the relatively quick rise in cars users in China.
Yeah.
The private car has a strong influence on urban planning for many decades. The focus was on dedicating more space to the car to allow a free and a smooth flow of traffic. This was achieved by removing the old city to create space for new car-oriented environment. The result are low-quality spaces, hostile to pedestrians and cyclists. Why do cities practically choke on road congestion? I would like to answer this with a very provocative quote. The one who saws roads will harvest traffic. This is a quote by Daniel Goudeveur. Daniel Goudeveur wasn't someone hostile to the car. He worked in a high-ranking position for Citroën, Renault, Ford, and Volkswagen. It was in his very interest to sell cars, but he also recognized the impact of car-focused planning in our cities. His quote describes in a concise way the phenomenon of induced traffic. An increasing number of cars will undoubtedly lead to a road congestion at some point, for example, a construction site. The most common solution was meet demand by building more road by expanding the road network. It doesn't present a solution that solves the problem, but leads to more traffic and even more congestion. The increased offer of road space leads to an increased demand. It's a vicious circle. More roads built will not create more space for an existing numbers of cars, but lead to an increased number of cars on an ever-growing road network cutting through our cities. It has proved very difficult to break this cycle. What's about megacities? Traffic and transport infrastructure continue to dominate the appearance of our cities. A new challenge for urban planners is the fast, often informal growth in previously unknown dimensions. This put a lot of stress on vital infrastructure, and resilience of basic services is vital. Like a magnet, large cities attract more people and they keep on growing. The numbers of megacities is rising. We talk about megacities on the population if the population is more than 10 million inhabitants. Once an expectation, they are more common now. The map we can see shows us there will 9 new megacities additionally to the 21 existing ones. 8 cities will even have a population between 20 and 30 million, and there will be 30 cities with a population about 30 million. The majority of the new megacities will emerge in the Asian countries and on the African continent. Megacities present a huge challenge for urban and transport planning. Apart from the provision of basic services, the population's mobility has to be planned. It is most important that nobody is excluded, so that everybody will be able to move around to reach place of work, education, healthcare, and other services. This presents another challenge for the planner, as transport infrastructure requires space, and space is a valuable resource in cities. From this perspective, transport infrastructure will, with a small physical footprint, presents an economic benefit. Let's have a look at the space requirements of different modes of transport. Mark.
Hey, thank you. So let's have a look at this graphic. It was done by the Austrian Transport Association, VCÖ, and spaces for traffic are very dominant visual and space consuming elements of our cities. This includes roads, bridges, but also foot and cycle paths. So which space we use for our mobility depends on how we move around and our mobility choices. All of us will use the footpath at some point, as walking is part of every journey. be it to reach our car, park on the street, or be it to go to the shops. Cyclists appreciate dedicated cycle paths. Cycling footpaths are comparatively narrow compared with the standard road width. With multiple lanes and curbside parking provided, road space is even wider and there is even wider, and there's less space for other modes of transport. The 2019 survey in Austria showed that more than a third of the country's built-up area, exactly 36%, is dedicated to transport. So that's more than a third just for transport. Now we have a look at the different modes of transport, and the private vehicle, the car, is by far the mode of transport with the highest space requirements. A private vehicle on the motorway requires about 47 square meters per person and still 40 square meters per person in an inner city environment. A cyclist only requires 8 square meters to move around. A person in a tram will only require 1.5 square meters on average, and a person in a metro underground train 8 square meters. So a modal share consisting of more active mode of transports and public transport will bring the opportunity to dedicate more space to other activities, to cycling, to walking, and to use the space as a place for meeting. A similar study undertaken for Amsterdam draws a similar image. The space requirements vary, but the car remains on top as the mode of transport with the high space requirements. At the other hand, with a lower space requirement, the pedestrian. So let's see what does it mean in real life environment. We're going to look at the Remberti roundabout, which is part of the Mozart Highway in Bremen. The Mozart Highway was to be built in the 60s as an elevated highway through the old city center, and it was never finished, but what remains is this big roundabout. So the higher the car ownership and use, the more visible the spaces exclusively used by the car will be in our cities. And this aerial photograph gives a good idea of the proportions of road space and the residential area it cuts through. So motorized individual vehicle traffic does not only require a lot of space, it also causes noise and air pollution with a negative impact on public health. Public transport infrastructure and traffic dominate the image of many cities. The higher the car ownership and usage, the higher the visual impact of transport infrastructure. A lot of people for example, would associate Los Angeles, apart from Hollywood and the beaches, with images of congested freeway. We look at the development potential of inner city development potential. So the increasing space used for transport infrastructure has a negative impact on the urban development. Reducing space for motorized traffic, such as reducing the number of road lanes and rethink current traffic management arrangements, can free space for other uses such as housing. Inner cities areas densified to create compact, walkable neighborhoods in short distance to daily commodities and services. To illustrate this concept, we created an outline design for this roundabout from the previous slide. So, as I said, this roundabout is part of the Mozart Highway, which was never completed, as residents successfully fought against the destruction of their neighborhood. The roundabout and the multi-lane highway still act as a barrier for movement. The green areas cannot be used as they are blocked off by the roads, and it wouldn't be pleasant to sit on them anyways as traffic moves around them. So the open space is underused, of low quality, but located in a prime inner city location. Let's have a look at the development potential. So we changed the road layout and got rid of the roundabout. The space is now freed for other land uses, and our outline proposal has an urban design that blends into the surrounding area and closes the gap in the urban fabric that was created by the road. The result, more inner city housing in walkable distance to public transport, commodities and services, reducing the need for car use further. So, but now, would you like to give a little halfway summary?
Of course, thank you. Let's summarize what we heard so far. The share of urban population is rising worldwide. Cities are growing. A large portion of built-up areas is dedicated to transport. The more people live in cities, the more important is the mobility of city dwellers. The mode of transport with the highest space requirement is the private vehicle, the car. The car was given priority in urban and transport planning for a very long time. This is the reason why cars and transport infrastructure dominate the image of our cities so much. The car did not only have the visual impact, but on the air quality and noise levels too. How do we perceive noise levels in a city? Here we see a survey looked into the perception of noise in urban environments. Traffic is perceived as most disruptive. It's not just cars that causes noise, but noise from other modes of transport is only generating occasionally and locally, such as along railway lines, for example. But it's difficult to find a space where there is no noise created by cars. Noise from commercial premises is limited to commercial areas, but everyone is exposed to traffic noise at some point. Noise can cause stress, permanent damage to hearing, or cardiac conditions. Our personal mobility habits can contribute to air pollution. While this may not be the case so much for walking and cycling, it's different for vehicles with a combustion engine. They produce fumes. The transport sector and industry are the main sources of air pollution. The World Health Organization, WHO, states that there are 7 million fatalities annually caused by air pollution. This happens mostly in large cities where the air pollution is worst. Large cities account for most of traffic and are home to most of industries. This graph on the left shows how decarbonate emissions by sector evolved since 1990. Decarbonate emissions for all sectors were reduced except emissions created by transport. They even increased and were then slightly reduced, but from a higher level. Recent years saw an increasing again. The graph on the right shows you that within the road transport sector, 60% of the emissions are created by car, followed by HUVs, 26.2%. So it became very obvious to our mobility choices to have a deeper look on our environmental impact. It became very obvious that our mobility choices have an environmental impact. Sealing of the ground, rising energy consumption for transport, noise and fumes became the unwanted companions of our wish for unlimited personal mobility. Natural resources are coming to an end. And this means that future generations will be compromised because of our current consumption and mobility habits. The principle of sustainability is the guiding principle for the future development of all aspects of our daily lives. To recap, what is the principle of sustainability and how it is linked to today's topic, mobility. Let's have a look at the definition published in 1987. Sustainable development is development which meets the needs of current generations without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own need. But how that affects our actions and behavior? We have to make sure that we don't finish valuable resources, allow for their reuse, or make use of renewable resources. The columns that carry the principle of sustainability were defined. They present 3 vital action areas of mutual influence. And how is the principle of sustainability applied to mobility? What is the influence of mobility on sustainability? Let's have a look what mobility means for each and every one of us. All of us needs to be mobile, of course, we heard that before. How mobile is firstly dependent on our personal physical condition. What I mean is, it depends on how far we can walk or cycle. Additionally, we have means to move around, the car or public transport. Our mobility becomes sustainable when moving around does not have a negative impact on any of the three columns of sustainability. Mobility has to be accessible to all in terms of physical accesses and financially with affordable fares. There is a positive economic impact when the operation of public transport creates employment and when it creates a profit. Access to places of work and the generation of an income by the use of mobility services are secondary indirect results. Preventing a negative impact of our mobility will pay off economically and socially through better public health and lower costs for healthcare and more productivity as less people fall ill. The impact of mobility is manifold on many areas. Mobility is therefore an important factor when aiming for sustainable development. Most countries for a sustainable development, which is actively supported by the United Nations. Mobility and transport are recognized as vital factors. The Agenda 21 from 1992 already stated that the support of eco-friendly transport systems contributes to the quality of human settlements. In its revision in 1997, the transport sector was identified as a leading sector behind rising energy consumption worldwide. The focus on the role of transport remains. A quarter of all greenhouse gases created by the transport sector, with an upward tendency. For that reason, climate policies focus on a significant reduction of its increasing energy consumption. The role of transport and mobility for economic development is recognized. Sustainable transport systems support economic development while preserving natural resources and support and strengthens social equality. This is the United Nations conclusion. Transport is a recurring topic of the Agenda 2030. The Agenda 2030 defines the Sustainable Development Goals designed to address various areas for sustainable development. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. For each goal, there are sub-goals. Their achievement can be measured by the indicators defined. Sustainable Development Goal number 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, aims to create the access to safe, affordable, accessible, and sustainable transport systems. This should mainly happen by upgrade and extension of public transport networks. The indicator for success is the percentage of a population with easy access to public transport. Mobility is becoming more important. Negative impacts of our mobility has to be reduced, if not completely stopped. There is new thinking. Sustainability is the overall development principle, not only applied to mobility. Transport network become multimodal. Multimodal mobility needs easy to use.
Yeah, let's have a look at new thinking and sustainable mobility. So there's new thinking with new priorities and new approaches when it comes to mobility. The principle of sustainability is also applied to mobility planning. To be sustainable, mobility needs to have a positive impact on economic, social, and ecological issues. Mobility is seen as a basic human right. But what does it mean? It means we all should be able to move around regardless of age, our physical capabilities, and our social economic status. Public transport plays an important role. It does not only allow a large number of people to be mobile, it also has a limited negative ecological impact. A socially acceptable fare structure allows use even with a low income. Everybody will be able to reach places of work, to the places for education and for leisure activities. And you may ask, why not use the car for all? Right, why not use the car for all? For sure, the car provides the highest level of mobility, but undoubtedly it has the largest ecological footprint and the cost of ownership is not affordable for all. Parts of the society would be limited in their mobility by their socioeconomic status and the chances for a change would be reduced. Plus, there's the ecological impact. Increased use of public transport will lead to less fumes and better air quality, less noise, less space in our cities, exclusively used by private vehicles. So when we talk about the modal share, This is the share of different means of transport in the transport mix of a city, region, or country. It shows the role of different transport modes play for an area. We get an impression of the mobility behavior. Non-motorized transport and public transport become the focal point of mobility planning. An attractive public transport network can achieve a reduction of the modal share of private vehicles. Let's have a look at the pie charts with the modal share of 6 European cities. So what do we see? London and Brussels are quite similar in the mobility patterns. Amsterdam and Copenhagen are considered cycle-friendly, and indeed their modal share of cycling is among the highest among the cities shown. But just have a look at the modal share of cycling in Berlin. It's close behind. The modal share of non-motorized transport is almost 50% in Copenhagen, and there's almost a similar modal share of public transport and walking in Amsterdam and Copenhagen. But look at Berlin. Berlin has the highest share of walking with 31%.
Amazing.
Amazing, yes. London and Amsterdam have a very similar modal share of the car, which is surprising given the different structure. And Berlin has the most evenly distributed modal share. Warsaw and Copenhagen have the same modal share of the car. But Warsaw exceeds all the cities with its modal share of public transport. Brussels, with a high modal share of the car, has a 26% of walking.
Why is that significantly for Warsaw that the public transport is proportion is very high?
I think it's the country of the former Eastern European bloc, and public transport was a planned economy, and transport was planned when they planned the residential neighborhoods, and there was no economic pressure behind.
Okay, thank you.
So let's have a look at the results of our survey we did earlier. Reinhard, would you like to have a look
here we go. Thank you to our colleagues that they prepared in the short time these slides. We have to mention that the results do not reflect the mobility pattern of a certain city or region, but present a mix and regions. We have a quite similar chart with Brussels. We see on the modal share, so 50% are motorized or came motorized to their work. Slightly 40% were not non-motorized, and 20% used the public transport. Directly depending to the modal share is how far you are living from your working place. So we see that more than 10 kilometers are for the half of the participants, their daily workway, and only 34 are below 5 kilometers distance to their work. So and half are living in cities or on the rural places.
But that might explain why so many people use the car, because they live far away from the workplace.
Exactly. This is what I wanted to explain. But it is pretty new for me, and but this is a significant graph for the modal split. How would I change the modal share? In a few words, desirable mobility behavior is supported and problematic developments are discouraged and should be reversed. Public transport plays an important part. It has been shown that a good public transport network in combination with non-motorized transport can transport people with low energy consumption and very limited negative impact on its environment. It will also need less space than cars. This all contributes to a higher quality of life in cities. Travel becomes predictable too. The daily commute and moving around becomes more pleasant. How to make the public transport more attractive? The desired transition to sustainable transport systems will certainly change the way we move around. An important step will be the continuous expansion of public transport networks. There are many levels to this process. Spatial expansion. The public transport services are expanded to cover a larger cover with the aim to bring the whole population into the catchment area of a stop for public transport. The use of public transport becomes more attractive. longer daily operation times, higher service frequency, and excellent accessibility for all stops and stations. The attractiveness of public transport can also be increased by comfortable vehicles in the fleet and attractive stops where it's possible to run errands and such as picking up parcels. Digitalization and the creation of linked data networks, real-time information about travel times, routes, and change to a planned trip will be even more easily available. The barrier to using public transport will be lowered. The benefits will not only be the passenger side. Public transport operators will be able to deliver a much more tailored service that meets demand and guarantees commuter satisfaction. Different modes will be used there. They can serve best. This refers to meeting demand capability to operate in a certain topography. A combination of transport modes can achieve a better service than relying on established options that might not be suitable for certain areas. So, Mark, will you explain multimodality?
Yes, please. So the continuous growth of cities requires a growth and adaptation of transport networks. As pointed out earlier, all city dwellers should be in the catchment area of public transport to make its use more attractive. That requires a spatial expansion and will include the extension of existing routes, for example. Upgrades to services such as higher frequency or longer operational hours will contribute to increased attractiveness. Multimodality was identified as one component for successful transport networks. So where we talk about multimodal transport networks, when various modes of transport are used within one transport network. Ideally, they are seamlessly linked. Transport hubs for interchanges between modes are called multimodal transport hubs. Their design facilitates a seamless interchange. This is useful and a necessary approach. It allows to deliver the best service in any topography or type of built environment and will also meet different local demands. More central areas will be frequented by a higher number of visitors are served by modes of transport with a high capacity, while other areas require a different solution. For example, smaller buses will serve a densely built up area with an irregular street pattern better than larger buses that cannot enter the area and could only deliver a service at the periphery of this area. That would mean that less people are in the convenient catchment area of the bus, and bus services would become less attractive as access is difficult. And information technology plays a big role for that. And Anna, would you explain?
New mobility solutions are not only of technical nature, but also aim to make trip planning and use easier or lower the barrier to using public transport. To make the use easier, it has proved vital to use available data and extract useful information that facilitate the use of public transport, such as a trip planning, or allow excuse me, for spontaneous changes to a trip by the user. Smart cities already make use of larger scale data collections and analysis, and this includes the traffic situation. Real-time information allows for prompt changes to a planned trip. All available data is merged, combined, constantly updated, and processed into information for the user that allows for reliable trip planning or for changes during travel. Route and choice of mode of transport can be changed promptly before a trip is interrupted.
So what's new about that?
It's not static schedules that are relevant for our trip planning, but flexible up-to-date data. They allow for a seamless, fast, and comfortable trip. It's not only the features of the hardware and its condition, but also the software, such as the provision of information and the ease of payment, an integrated fare system or way to facilitate ticket purchases across different systems and platforms. It will only for reliable trip planning, but also allow complete transparency about the cost of travel. Another new and important feature is the ability to use modes of transport outside an established transport network and combine them where necessary. Passengers might change from the bus, from a public transport network to a rental bike by a different operator without being charged on a separate invoice or without the need for passenger to research arrival and departure times separately. This requires the creation of platforms, data hubs with not only information about services from various providers, but also the option of a one-stop payment. The user is not confronted with a myriad of schedules, different options, different pay models to enter individual preferences and various payment systems, but with a single platform that uses the preferences across different systems from different providers. All trip information is available and payment is arranged by the press of a button or nowadays probably with the swipe on a screen. So to make public transport the most attractive mobility option also aims to reduce the modal share of private vehicles towards public transport or non-motorized transport. In this context, it's also required to allow comparison with the car. The car offers the highest level of independence and shortest travel times might be wrong, especially in large urban agglomerations where road congestion compromises the quality of car trips significantly. We are convinced that clear political incentives and leadership, massive upgrades and expansion of public transport might not prove to be sufficient. A congestion charge or city tolls and parking management can achieve very efficiently a modal shift towards public transport. Another effect, areas with less cars that offer a high quality environment, for example, green lines or parks or cafes on the pedestrian area. It requires courage and sometimes an effort to take a different approach, open to new solutions such as a cable car.
So we talked about climate change and sustainable development, and we all see that the need for action against the climate crisis is indisputable. A term you might have come across in this context is the CO2 or carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the gas that causes the greenhouse effect. When burning wood, oil, or gas, carbon dioxide is emitted. Carbon dioxide does not disintegrate by itself. Plants will help with the disintegration of carbon dioxide by photosynthesis. For example, a natural circle kept the carbon dioxide level in the air stable for a long time, but it is estimated that the carbon dioxide level quadrupled 4 times more since the start of the industrialization. Transport was identified as one of the main sources of carbon dioxide emissions. And it's still here. That's why this is here the largest potential reduction of carbon dioxide emissions. 95% of all emissions from transport are emitted from road transport. So reduction of road transport could lead to a large reduction of emissions coming from the transport sector. It is vital, therefore, to achieve a shift from individual motorist transport towards low emission modes of transport, because even with low emission cars, their positive effect on the total amount of emissions is outweighed by a rising number of cars. The result, carbon dioxide emissions remain the same or reduce at a slower rate than in other sectors. We can look here at this graph. 1990, 106 emissions from cars is very low. Meanwhile, for example, the emissions from energy production were significantly reduced, and the reduction was much lower in the transport sector. So I think this is my final slide for today. And I think, Reinhard, would you add anything or would you like to make any final remarks?
Yeah, we heard a lot of challenges ahead in the mobility sector. There is the provision of mobility solutions for all, regardless of income, the place of residence, and personal physical abilities. Sustainability, the preservation of fitness of our planet for the grandchildren's generation is the guiding principle for this task. Mobility has to contribute to a sustainable development, of course, and more than that, It is a vital component. Well-planned and attractive public transport can provide mobility more efficiently and with a smaller ecological footprint than transport with private motorized vehicles. Without doubt, a good public transport can increase the quality of life in cities. A good example is Vienna, a city proud of its public transport offer. The city is high up in all rankings of the most livable cities in the world. The modal shift towards public transport has to be attractive, and as you can learn it from Vienna, it's easy to use the public transport services. Vital for this is also a modern fleet, reliable and safe operations, but also the ease of use. Especially trip planning and fare payment has to be easy and quick. The barrier of using public transport has to be low. Political incentives, as I said before, and support from their side is very important. It requires a complete package of coordinated solutions and measures and integrated and concept for implementation. With these final statements, I'd like to end today's webinar. Thank you for watching.
Thank you, Reinhard. And thank you to our technical team behind the camera. And
you did a great job, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, especially for the survey and the preparation of the slides. But
last but not least, there are more webinars coming up.
Yes,
Reinhard.
This was just a starting point. We have planned to have more webinars. Next one will be in September 21. It's about public transport. We will hear some experts from the planning sector as well, and it might be very interesting what are their insights, how to plan, how to integrate a multimodal and sustainable transport network into a city. In October, we plan to have a webinar about transport planning, an explained one, and this is more than about developing a network and how to reach the catchment areas. And in January and March next year, we are talking about mobility in the research area and how about planning of urban quarters. So yes. With this outlook.
And yes, and while this one was only bars, for the next webinars, we invited a few specialists who are going to talk to and who give us talk about their work and give us a good look behind the scenes of transport planning, of mobility as a research object, and of planning of urban quarters. So thank you again. And
thank you, Mark.
Have a wonderful day. Thank you, Reinhard.
Have a good day and stay safe. And we are hoping to welcome you on the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.